hitting rock bottom is kind of an amazing thing to happen.
I'm so grateful that I did hit quote unquote rock bottom. There's so many great learning points that your life is now your oyster. You can think about, you can change your whole trajectory. Your whole persona can change.
Is you want to fail many, many times, and you want to do it as early as possible in your life. Because that's when you can afford to fail and get up and keep going. I couldn't have conceived of taking a career path that I ended up at. I mean, to be honest with you, you'd asked me, in my early or late 20s, like, do you even know that this path exists in terms of what I ended up doing? The answer would have been no.
Welcome everybody to another episode of DC Talks with David Cinelli. I am your host, David Cinelli, and we have a really special guest with us today, Mr. Rehmann. How are you doing today?
Great, Dave. How are you? That was quite an intro.
Yeah, I will give a little bit of like where Rehmann comes from. Again, this is episode 95. We're doing a very different episode today. In the past, we've always brought in some sort of entrepreneurs and let them know where they were and how they gained success throughout their careers. You're a little bit of a different animal. You climbed the corporate ladder and you've been very successful since we've known each other for what, 6-7 years? You moved
7 years, I think.
Yeah. So Rehmann, actually, we knew each other because Rehmann moved next door to me, and we became good friends. At the beginning, like our first interaction, I had to replace a fence, and you almost chopped my balls off for that because.
I'm glad we're going there this early in the episode.
Yeah. But it was funny because it was. I felt back as we were putting up, I guess we were putting the pool or something at the time, and you had moved in, and you're like, you guys have spent all this money renovating and bought a brand new home, and it was out of a situation where it was like, all your money, and you're like, I don't even know you, and I'm saying, hey, can I have some money? And you're like, like, what the hell? It wasn't a great introduction on our part, and we apologize for that. But since that time, like, we became really good friends, really close neighbors, and you're probably one of my closest friends, and I've never had a neighbor like you, and I don't think I'll ever have a neighbor like you again. So that's Rehmann's introduction. But let's fast forward. Where are you right now? Like, what is your position? So for those of you who don't know, where you've climbed the corporate ladder, what does that mean?
Yeah. So maybe I'll just start with kind of my current role and position. So I work in technology. I work in enterprise software. And for folks who are not familiar, enterprise software is software that gets built and sold to other businesses. And that's, as opposed to consumer software, which is software that gets sold to individuals, like, for example, apps on your phone. Right. So we essentially build software that gets used by other businesses. In the company that I'm at right now, I'm the Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer. So quite literally, I'm responsible for corporate strategy, and I'm responsible for marketing. And I guess to kind of boil that down, strategy is all about figuring out where the growth comes from in our business. As you can imagine, growth coming from selling more to your customers, finding new customers, going into new markets, building new products, figuring out all of the strategy and the formula behind that is what I'm responsible for with my team. And then I run marketing, which is exactly what it sounds like. And I would boil that down to being responsible for creating awareness, preference, and demand. That's a bit of a cliche in marketing in the markets we serve. So basically identifying who the customers are and making them aware of who we are and making them interested in our products.
Yeah. And you have an interesting role because you're brought into Model N, that's the name of the company, to basically sell the company. Am I correct?
Yeah. So I wouldn't actually quite put it like that. If I kind of rewind the film a little bit and look at kind of the last, I guess it's been about 11 or 12 years, I have worked with the same management team to come into a business that has a lot of potential and really figure out ways to accelerate growth, find ways to focus the business, find ways to make the business more profitable. And the output of that, in my case now, kind of 2 times in a row, has been that we've ended up selling the business on behalf of the investor group. And so we did this for the first time at a company called Plex Systems, which is where I was from 2013 until 2018. That business was eventually sold to Rockwell, which is a big industrial company in the States. And now I've been at Model N for the last 6 years. And actually, we just sold the business. The deal just closed over the summer to a private equity firm called Vista Equity Partners. And so I wouldn't say that we always come in with the intention to sell, but it just so happens that that's kind of been the outcome twice in a row.
Yeah, so it's funny that the reason why I said that is because you've sold the last companies couple in a row, and I'm like, is this what you do? It was because I thought you were into marketing and strategy. And I was like, yeah. And like, so we had a conversation earlier this year. You were selling, the company was being sold, and we were trying to figure out where you stood in that. So that's kind of where we're at. And so Rehmann and I, we have cigars, some scotch. Sometimes we like to enjoy our gin on the well. If you guys are good gin drinkers, what's that gin that you bring over the bottle?
Monkey 47.
Monkey 47. If you guys haven't tried Monkey 47, you introduced me to that gin. Wow.
It's the best gin ever.
Yeah, it's a good thing it only comes in small bottles. Guess we would kill that. So we were having a conversation about that. And I was like, this is how the podcast kind of started. And again, I was always focused on a lot of entrepreneurs. And I was like, Rehmann, you've done very well for yourself. And we were kind of like, how did that even start? Because again, when I met you, you were just starting, like you weren't as, you didn't have the high as of a position as you currently have. And you started telling me how the journey started. And I was like, this would be a great podcast. I think my audience want to know is like, you don't always have to be an entrepreneur to be able to be very successful in businesses. And I think that's sometimes, I get caught up in that too, because I've seen some of my friends just get stuck in corporate world, and they're just like, they live like a 9 to 5, and they look forward to the weekends and their vacations, and the rest of the time they're just dead on their feet. And I was like, they're getting fatter. You know what I mean? They're sitting on their desk, and you've lost weight. You look fantastic. So like you've actually, I think you're Benjamin Button. You've done the opposite. So everything you're doing, I'm like, this could be a topic for somebody. You can be inspiring people working in the corporate world. And that's why I thought the podcast started. So that was a long lead up into, how did you start? How did this come about? Because from where you did your MBA, and you start with your school with the MBA, and tell the story how you told me.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, before I answer the question, I can just imagine my wife rolling her eyes as you sort of, draw an analogy to Benjamin Button. So. Ted, if you're listening, I didn't say it. He did.
Well, we've seen pictures we've agreed about this. Yeah, like totally. Anyway, COVID did some wonders to us. Actually, I think COVID, you started to get better looking, and during COVID, I was going to say that, but am I allowed to say that?
Okay, so let's get back to the question. So,
Sure.
And I'm going to actually rewind the film further, really I'm going to go back to high school because, I think when I was in high school, I definitely always had this idea of wanting to get into business. And, when you're that age, you don't know a whole lot, about different paths. Yeah. But I had this idea from a relatively young age that I wanted to be in business. And, at that point, it was about, wearing, fancy clothes and, going into important meetings and closing deals and whatnot. And I think that's pretty typical for a lot of us, candidly. I studied business when I went to McGill. And then the reason that's important is because when I came out of McGill, I really spent kind of the first 10 years of my career doing what I think of as actually a pretty typical kind of Bay Street, Wall Street path. And I would say that I did well in that, in those fields. I was in investment banking for a little bit. I was in management consulting for quite a long period of time. I spent a little bit of time at an investment firm, basically investing in public and private companies. And although I did well in those fields, I always kind of had this feeling, and honestly, I had it from the very beginning, that this is just a stepping stone to something more interesting. And candidly, Dave, to use the word that you've brought up now a couple of times, candidly more entrepreneurial. And I didn't know exactly in what shape or form that would take, but I definitely wanted to become an entrepreneur, at least at that point. And so when I went to business school, I spent most of my time trying to figure this out, trying to answer this question, and ended up post-business school actually going off and raising some money from some investors. And I think this kind of connects to the story you probably wanted me to tell around raising some money from some investors with the intention to go off and buy a company that I could then run as the CEO and president. And it's kind of amazing to think back, as this was, I graduated from business school in 2011, so 13 years ago, the hubris that I had at that age. And honestly, I think that's one of the most amazing things about being young is you don't know what you don't know and you don't care. You just want to go get something done. And I like to, to use the analogy you used at the beginning of the call, I'm glad I had the balls to do that because I learned a ton from that experience, even though 2 years later, it actually didn't work out the way that I had hoped. And so I sort of packed up, my tent. I returned the money to my investors.
Did they get interest on the return, or you just give it back to them?
Oh, they took a massive loss because I'd spent 2 years living off their money to find a business and didn't end up doing a deal.
Right.
And that's a whole other separate story actually. But my investors were extremely gracious about the whole thing, and it actually it made the decision a little bit easier for me, candidly. So I pack up shop. I get the money back to the investors. Tail between my legs, and honestly, just very tired and exhausted from the experience, and not really having a sense for what I was going to do. And incidentally, that summer, I ended up, I guess two things happened that summer, if I'm going to broaden the story a little bit. One was I met Tiff, who has now become my wife. I met her literally days after I had closed the fund at the time. And I also met somebody named Jason Blessing, who had just become the CEO of this company called Plex Systems, the company had been bought by private equity. They hired him to run the business. I got introduced to him through a former colleague of mine, and he was looking for somebody with my skill set to help with sort of special projects and strategic planning.
But you were telling me, you're going to tell the story how you met him?
How did I meet him?
Remember we were talking because you had 2 phone calls to make on your way.
Yeah.
Are we allowed to talk about that too?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this
is the part. Guys, the reason why I'm bringing this up, it's like you never know where opportunities lie. It doesn't matter whether it's the corporate world or an entrepreneurial world. And when you told me how you met this person, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, think about it. And technically, no offense to you, but it's like, at this point, you hit rock bottom, it felt like to you, right? And we had talked about it. You're like, you had no prospects. You didn't know what the hell you want to do. You have this business degree, and you're like, what the hell do I do? And you decide to go on a vacation.
Totally. Yeah. So thanks actually for bringing that up, Dave. So what happened was that summer is exactly as Dave described, which was, I kind of hit rock bottom, didn't know what I was going to do. And for the first time in my career, actually, just sort of like, I'm stalled. I've stalled out. Don't know what's going to happen today or tomorrow. And I ended up being invited from a good friend of mine to go to Israel to actually attend his sister's wedding. And I have no business being at his sister's wedding, but he invited me because I think he probably felt sorry for me, to be honest.
Well, yeah, nothing else going on. You want to go on a wedding? Sure, why not?
Sure, why
want to
not?
go to Israel, halfway across the world? Sure, why not?
Exactly. And so at that point, I had just started dating Tiff, and I was like, I'm going to go to Israel for 10 days. And while I'm in Israel, having the time of my life, honestly, probably one of the best holidays I've ever had, I'm starting to think about like, okay, I'm going back next week. What am I going to do? And I had this idea at the time that I should just find some part-time contract and consulting work to kind of keep the lights on while I really figure out what I'm going to do. And so from Israel, I ended up sending 2 emails to people that I know inquiring about consulting work. And I think where you were going with this, Dave, was both of those emails ended up translating into introductions to CEOs of businesses that ended up translating into consulting work. Both of them ended up getting consulting work. And one of those introductions was to this individual named Jason Blessing, who has essentially been my, the CEO and my boss for the last, 13 years. Mm-hmm. And so, I think going back to the kind of the lesson I think you were trying to allude to, hitting rock bottom is kind of an amazing thing to happen, because that's actually where the seeds of whatever you end up doing next are sown. And so in some ways it actually is, I know it's a hard thing to go through in the moment, but when you look back, that's actually in a lot of ways a healthy thing for all of us to go through once in a while.
And I say that to my kids, and like, it's funny, like with Mila, my older daughter, she got into, that art school. We were hoping she didn't get in. So she get to rock. I'm like, hey, you got to pick up your grades. You got to do this, got to work. But she got in. We're like, my wife and I were looking at each other and we're like, we wish she kind of would have failed at something that just kind of pushed a little bit. I know that sounds different than our parents. Our parents' generation was always like, no one can see you fail. Whereas we're like, yeah, like, we've all hit rock bottom. Like, I'm at my position now because I hit rock bottom. I could have, if I didn't get let go, if I didn't hit that rock bottom, I could have done the same job. I could have been one of those corporate guys who just kind of floated through and kind of did okay, and I could have been one of those guys. I'm so grateful that I did hit quote unquote rock bottom. And I'm encouraging those people, the listeners out here, is like, obviously don't intentionally go out to hit rock bottom. But if it happens, there's so many great learning points that your life is now your oyster. You can think about, you can change your whole trajectory, your whole persona can change, because it's like, well, the last one didn't work. What do I do need to improve? And I love this story about you. And like, I had no idea you'd gone through that. And I'm like, this is amazing. I think my listeners would love to hear that.
Yeah.
And now how it's translated. So now you're in this role, and you became his right-hand man effectively. How did that work? Because you're like, now he's like, between from when you started to now, it's like you guys are like this, like together. So if you can't, if you're just listening, they're like, basically you can't go one without the other for a while. Like, well, although maybe now it's a little different. He's left the company, but that's a different story. But,
yeah. So I guess, and just, Dave, to touch on this point around rock bottom, and maybe I kind of equate that to just sort of like, this nasty word that's sort of, failure, right? Which is a word that nobody likes to, talk about or bring up. I'm a big believer that you learn the most from failures, right? And I'm a big believer that failure in life is important. And what you want to do is you want to fail many, many times, and you want to do it as early as possible in your life. Because that's when you can afford to fail and get up and keep going. And you have a lot of runway to figure things out. And I'm lucky in my example that I have many examples of failure, especially through my 20s and early 30s. And so, that's something that people should embrace. You don't want to have a boring straight line path at that age. You're not taking enough risk, in my view.
Oh, 100%. I would agree with that too. Yeah. And if everything's just boring, then do something different, I think even since you've known Natalie stuff, like she gets to a point where her business grows to a certain point and she's like, I'm out. She just gets bored with it. I'm like, we're in a position now, like her photography business, for example. She was like, it ran its course. She no longer enjoyed it.
Yeah.
She's still amazing at it. She's like, let's change this. Let's do something else.
Yeah.
I'm hoping the staging lasts a little longer than that.
Me too.
Exactly. Yeah. So Ramon's also a client. That's why he says that. So let's fast forward now. So where's the business now? So the business got sold, and now you're still working with the business, and everything is everything going all right on that side?
Yeah. So let's actually, Dave, if I could, let's go back to the question you actually asked me just around kind of, what the journey was.
Yes. Sorry.
What the journey was like. So I would say this. I couldn't have conceived of taking a career path that I ended up at. I mean, to be honest with you, you'd asked me, in my early or late 20s, like, do you even know that this path exists in terms of what I ended up doing? The answer would have been no. But I would say that when I was in business school, in business school, you have a lot of guest speakers that come in and talk to you. And, we have people from all walks of life, entrepreneurs, athletes, senior executives, politicians, you name it. People come in and speak and talk about their experience. And I used to love watching public speakers at school. And we had one public speaker in particular. I remember he came to our leadership class. His name is Alex Gorski. And at the time, he was the CEO of J&J's, that's Johnson & Johnson's medtech business. So Johnson & Johnson, massive company, everybody knows them for, baby shampoo. They have three divisions. They have a division that sells, shampoos and consumer products. They have a division that sells pharmaceuticals, and they have a division that sells medical devices. He was the CEO of the medical device business. He had started there literally at the very bottom, fresh out of school. And he was invited to our class to talk about the journey that he had taken to become the CEO of this division. And he eventually obviously became the CEO of the entire business over time. And honestly, at that particular point in time, that was the first time that I had heard from a senior executive talk about not an entrepreneurial path, but what has become now fashionable to call entrepreneurship, the idea that you're sort of an entrepreneur within the four walls of a business. And that was actually the first time that I actually got inspired to think, like maybe that's a path that I could take. Never thought about going into a corporate environment, but that sounds like the kind of thing that like I'd be good at.
Yeah.
And again, coming back to what I said, earlier in the conversation, like it's not always about having all the answers in terms of how you're going to do something when you're young, but it's about seeing something that you desire, something that you think A, you want it, and B, you think you'll figure out how to get it. And that's the spark that you need in order to motivate you to go get something done. And that was the seed of this idea that like, oh, maybe a corporate environment could be interesting to me. And I remember reflecting back on that once I got into, that business, because it was exactly that conversation that had sort of sparked this idea for me.
So speaking on that now, because you've pretty much the goals in which you're having, like it seems that you've achieved a lot of those goals, and now obviously you have to reset. So how does somebody like yourself, like what kind of goals do you set for yourself to keep you motivated?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, Dave, like when I was younger, I used to have a lot of you know, by X age, I have to, you know, be at this title or I have to have this much money. And I was like very regimented about like what it was and how I was going to get there. And as I've gotten older, I've actually gotten much more relaxed in terms of having rigid plans. And actually, I mean, if you think about it, right, the last, you know, 12 or 13 years of my career has pretty much been unscripted. And what I mean by that is I fell into this opportunity. I made the most of it. It translated into another opportunity with, you know, the same leadership team. We've made the most of it and had success. And incidentally, I've actually just signed on now to stay with the company with this new owner. And so I'm honestly just kind of taking things one day at a time. And I'm having a great time doing it. I'm learning a lot. I like the people I work with. And we'll kind of just see what the future holds. I would say that at some point, I think I would like to try my hand at becoming the CEO and being responsible for the entire business and the entire leadership team, and really driving the success from the very top. But that's not something I have to do. I think when I was younger, I was like, I must be the CEO, right? I have to be there by the time I'm 30, you know, and here I am at 43 and I'm like, oh, maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. And so, yeah, I'm kind of just taking it one step at a time, but it is, again, a bit of a cliche. It's much more about the journey than the destination. And it's been a great one so far.
I love that. I love that. And it's so funny because I think sometimes people don't enjoy the journey because they are so regimented or they're so, you know, numbers generated that they have to hit a certain number. And they don't stop to smell the roses. They don't understand where they've been before. They can't see their past successes because their eyes are focused somewhere else. And I think you're total opposite. I think that's why I get along with you so well, is because I think where you are grounded in that. I love the fact that you love the whole journey is a huge part of it. That's part of life, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think it kind of goes back to what you're, you know, attempting to get me to answer earlier, which is, you know, how did you do it, right? So I think it comes down to, you know, number one, really liking what you do and really doing the best, not at the job that you think you want 5 or 10 years from now, but like, you know, it's the work that's on your desk right now, right? In the job you're in, make the most of it, do the best you can, exceed expectations. You know, I actually, you know, as I reflect back on that particular point when I joined Plex, again, I joined this company as a mid-level employee, and you know, I was by no means a senior person. But I had this thing where I said to myself very consciously, I said, anything that I have to do, I'm going to do it better than anybody else. And the kicker, I'm going to do it faster than anybody else. And so when I had something on my plate, I would turn it around immediately and I would do it to the best of my ability. And if you do that enough times, eventually you will get noticed. And once you get noticed, the sky is the limit in terms of how fast and how far you can go within a business. And it's really, really hard to get noticed. But you don't do it by being flashy in the business. You don't do it by wearing colorful clothes or you know, trying to, you know, sound smart in meetings. You do it by delivering really, really good quality work. And also importantly, being super helpful to everybody around you, regardless of whether you benefit from it, you know, or not. And, you know, another way to kind of think about it is, you know, this is kind of going back to my, you know, some of my marketing classes in school. All of us as human beings carry a brand, right? You know, when you say Dave Tonelli, in my head, I have a certain idea of Dave, right? We all carry a brand. Right. And by the way, there are good attributes and not so good attributes about all of our brands. In a company, your brand is the most important thing to you and your success. And you want your brand to say the most amazing things about you. You are, you know, consistent, you meet expectations, you show up on time, you try hard, you have a good attitude, you don't complain, you're easy to work with, you're fun to work with, you have a good sense of humor, right? You know, you don't, you know, let the negative setbacks set you back. I mean, these are all the kinds of things that you want to be associated with your brand. And if you have those things, you know, that's what's going to carry you to the next level. And so I was really, really fortunate that I got into that business hungry as hell, honestly, just willing to do anything to be successful. And eventually I got noticed, and it was getting noticed, which ended up carrying me and bringing me more opportunities, and, you know, opportunities to demonstrate, you know, build my skills and also demonstrate what I'm capable of.
Well, it's so funny because everything you've said, I can translate while I was an analyst. I could have applied that as that work, but it 100% applies to my job right now. Everything you do is what I want my brand to be. I want to make sure I'm on time. I want to make sure I'm all those attributes. So whether you're an entrepreneur, if you're a realtor, listen to what Rehmann just said. Like that is powerful, powerful stuff. If you're an employee, it's also very powerful. And it's not always about flashy news. And again, your recognition won't come until maybe later on. I mentor a bunch of realtors. And on Tuesdays we sit around here, and some of them get frustrated because, you know, some of them are newer into the business. And I try to explain to them, it's like, it's going to take some time for your brand to come out, to people recognize it. You know, not everybody's fortunate once you start in any business that you get a ton of sales right away. But if you're consistent of who you are and what you're doing, and you're doing the right things, you'll get noticed, and then all of a sudden it'll start. So what you're doing now you may not see results for the next 6 months. And you have to be prepared for that. But that doesn't mean we all get frustrated. We don't get business right away. That happens. But it's consistency. It's continually doing the good things. Building that brand will help you along the way. But it's exactly the same for business. You might be working in a corporate world, which you don't think your CEO notices or your CFO notices, but they notice. If they don't always have to call you and say, where's the report I asked you for like a week ago? Where is it? If they never have to do that, they're going to notice. If everything's on plate, on their time, and everything is accurate and it's done very, very well, like you said, it may not happen tomorrow, but if you do it consistently over 6 months, a year, even 2 years, hey, listen, you're in it for the long haul. First of all, you have a job. You're getting paid for this. But the second thing is that they will notice. And that's how you got noticed by Jason. We had this conversation. I'm like, you started in this lower level. What did you do? And you told me that story. I'm like, you got to share that. You got to share that story.
Yeah, no, totally. It's actually funny. You kind of drew an analogy to real estate. I didn't immediately think of that, but you know, Dave, if you think about it, anybody who's highly successful in their careers, there's an analogy to be said for this in general, right?
Yeah.
And it is kind of the basic ingredients for success, probably in any field, candidly.
Yeah, but I also like the fact it's also a people business.
Yeah.
You brought in something that people don't think about in the corporate world. It's like, are you easy to work with? Yeah, because nobody wants to work with an asshole. I don't care if it's in the corporate world. I don't care if it's like an entrepreneur. If you're an asshole, nobody wants to work with you. There's a photographer that's local over here. He's great at what he does, but he's such a dick that it's turning off so many realtors. I'd be surprised if his quality of work wasn't so great. He probably wouldn't have any business if he was mediocre. But he's exceptionally well. But I still won't use him because I've had some bad experience with them. And it's one of those things. It's like, and if you start getting a bad name over and over and over again, it can't be good. The other thing you said is have a good sense of humor. Like, think about that in the corporate world. People want to be around you. Then they start and helping people. Like, that's one thing I think you know about me. I try to help as many people as possible. And, you know, I think that mentality started coming in when I was a realtor. My dad had installed us. When my dad passed away, I didn't realize how many people he had helped. And at his funeral, the funeral home, we had like 3 days of funeral home. There was a lot of people. He died at 72. It was like, he was still young, right? I can't even count how many people who came to me and said, your dad helped me with this. He didn't tell you? No. Your dad helped me with this. Your dad, the advice, the money, like anything. And I wanted to be known as that. So unfortunately, it's one of those rock bottoms, which when my dad passed away, was pretty rock bottom for me. That lesson will always stick with me. It was at the funeral home, what people said about him. I want to be that guy. I want to do it better than my dad. I think we all want to do better. But thank you for bringing that. I think that's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, you know, I'm a big fan of Warren Buffett. I think we'll talk about mentorship probably a little bit later, or you know, this idea of having heroes. But you know, Warren Buffett says, write your obituary now, and then live your life according to what you want people to remember you by. And I actually think that that's a brilliant way to approach it, because you just reverse engineer the outcome you're looking to get. So directly applicable.
Yeah. So mentors, let's just get into this. We're almost done. There's a half hour. So we have 1 minute for a half hour. We're gonna have to wrap up soon.
Yeah.
So as your mentors now, like, who do you look up to, and what would you tell other people? Like, whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're working in the corporate world, what would you suggest them look into? Like, who would you look up to?
Yeah. So let me attack this from 2 different angles. So one is the idea of mentorship is super important. And there are 2 kinds of mentors that you can find. One are people that know you personally, right? Who are hopefully in a place in their careers that you eventually want to get to. They take an interest in you, and you approach them, and there's sort of a formal or informal way of getting advice and guidance. And in my case, in the business that I was in, it ended up being the CEO of the business who, as I said, kind of noticed, I got noticed by him, eventually got to do some work directly for him. And then that sort of grew into a bigger, more formal role directly kind of, supporting his agenda. And that was honestly the most amazing thing for me. And it has carried me quite literally more than anything else in the last 10, 12 years. It doesn't have to be the CEO, but it has to be somebody who's probably at least 2 or 3 levels above where you are. Somebody who's kind of, at least 10 years plus where you are, who can sort of guide you. And that is incredibly valuable. The other type of sort of mentor that I think of is, less a mentor. I actually think of them more as sort of iconic heroes, are people who you don't know, people who don't know you, but people who have a public persona. There's books about them. They're on, YouTube doing interviews. Maybe they've, already passed away, but you can go back and read stuff that they wrote or that was written about them. And you can learn a lot from people who have been successful in past, days and generations. And I particularly love reading biographies and sort of studying successful people, over time. In my case, the person that I've learned the most from in this category would be Warren Buffett, who of course is still with us at the age of 95. He's
a little bit smart.
He's a little smart.
He's a little smart.
A little smart. I would say this, right? Like, it doesn't matter who your mentor or who your hero is. Just find somebody that you gravitate towards and just soak up everything you can about them. And the reason why I love reading about biographies about famous people is you learn about all the good stuff, but you also learn about the flaws.
Yeah.
Every human being is flawed in some way, and that's what makes them human. So yes, that's how kind of I approach the mentor question.
So the one thing of Warren Buffett I loved, he had this one book about finance, and I was looking at stocks. I hadn't bought any stocks. I just did it on my own. And the couple of stocks I actually ran his formula with wasn't one. It was like a couple $1,000. They all made money, and it was simple math. And it's I was waiting for a threshold. One of them was Rona, another one was I think West 49, and all the ones. And I was waiting for one to hit a threshold. It didn't hit, but if I would have just would have laxed on his numbers, I still would have made money. But I loved that. It was one of those books you read. And I was like, it was a formula. It was simple. You could see how he's honed on it and make it simple for the easy investor. So if you ever want to try that, that's a great opportunity. I forget the name of the book, but there's something about Warren. He's got tons of those, and the ones with actual formulas in there. But you said something which I want to touch on before we go. And you said about somebody that's older than is in a position that you maybe want to be. In our day and age, especially, kind of public figure like us, and there's other realtors get public, we get knocked down a lot, right? There's a lot of negative stuff too. And it's like, I always laugh because you have to have a thick skin. There's always going to be people negative in your life, but you got to look at them like it just happens, right? And it's like, if the person criticizing you is not somebody you aspire to be, or is not in a position above you or where you want to be, laugh it off, because it's like their opinion means nothing. They're more looking at themselves. It's more of a reflection of themselves not doing what you want to do. So take that into heart, in the sense that they may be jealous of you. So I love that fact. Somebody listen to Rehmann's, his words of advice. Somebody who you look up to is in a position where you want to be. Then you can listen to their creative criticisms, maybe mentorship. That goes much further than somebody just knocking you down just for the sake of it. I
100% agree, Dave. And to put it even more strongly, never take advice from somebody who doesn't have what you want.
Love it.
Ever. Because those people often are the most vocal and the most negative, candidly.
Yeah. And those people need to get out of your life. Yeah. I'm sorry. Well, believe it or not, we have to wrap up, my friend.
Awesome.
Yeah, I know it went by pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Thank you again for coming. So I know you don't even have IG, do you? I don't think I follow you on IG. I follow your wife, but I don't know if I follow you. Do you I don't know if you want to share that, because if it's public or private, don't worry about that. But we can always tag you in this if you like. Or if you want people to reach out to you, ask questions, it's up to you.
I'm not on IG, but shameless plug. You should actually have Tiff on the podcast. Yeah. My wife is actually an entrepreneur, not like me within a corporate environment, but an actual entrepreneur. And she'd be a great guest for you.
Yeah. Let's talk about over cigar.
Done.
Well, thanks again, Rehmann. Guys, we always encourage you to please, if you like what you heard and you like what Rehmann was saying too, and I absolutely love the fact you're here, and thank you again for this. We always ask on whether you're on YouTube to like, share, make a comment. If you want to follow, you can always DM me for any new ideas. But again, if you don't know where to listen to these on this podcast, check out my IG account and click the link tree there. And again, like and share and do all that fun stuff for us to make sure we continue to produce these quality products for you. Have a wonderful day, guys. Bye for now.